As we continue to talk about the labor market and move beyond the labor force participation or labor force participation rate, we have to think about measuring unemployment and measuring employment and how those rates are brought about. So let's first take a look at some issues with respect to employment and unemployment. First of all, we need to take somewhat of a historical perspective of this and think of a period referred to as the jobs movement. The jobs movement is that period of time beginning really with the onset of the Industrial Revolution, where workers in large numbers began to leave the farm, leave their ranches, leave the land, and begin to go into organized labor, maybe go into towns and work for factories. It's not that we haven't pretty much always had, through our recorded history, some small part of the population that had a job, which means they've gone to trade their labor in exchange for some currency or some goods, bartered goods perhaps. But that number as a percentage of the population up until really the nascent era or nascent period of the Industrial Revolution was a very, very small percentage of the population. In fact, in some countries, that's still a very small percentage of the population. In this country, that would have measured less than 1% of the population until that period of time. So the jobs movement really began as factories or organized production started to accumulate or gather such that it needed labor units to be able to make products. And those workers then began to be paid by firms. Maybe there were taxes withheld. Maybe there were benefits provided much later on, of course. But this was organized, it was formal, and these people were not self-employed. In fact, in some respects, you would suggest that the worker no longer owned the product of their labor. They had sold it off in an arranged contract before they even provided the labor. And that arranged contract gave them so much money per day, so many dollars per hour, so much money per month. When we think about the formal labor markets, we're talking about those labor markets which provide some reporting through to state, municipal, or federal governments, where there are paychecks or transfers of funds digitally in today, but where there was actual reporting taking place. This wasn't just cash being exchanged, this wasn't just commodities being exchanged for labor, but that the worker, who's now part of the jobs movement, is actually receiving a wage, and that worker's activities are being reported through to some governmental agency such that it's part of an organized, very formalized labor segment. We have to contrast that with the informal labor market, and the informal labor market being just the opposite, of course, where there clearly is labor that's being exchanged for some value, some wage, some barterable commodity perhaps, but where this is not being done under the watchful eye of a government. This is not being done in a formalized way. There's no type of reporting on this. This might be the individual that makes trinkets and sells them on Etsy, but doesn't consider themselves self-employed. They just do it for some extra cash. This might be the young person in the neighborhood that mows lawns and receives some money from each of the residents for whom they mow lawns for. But this also could be someone who is much older, has a very productive position, but who chooses to keep their product and their labor under the table, if you will. We can consider this as anything within any criminal element. We can think of this as anything where there is maybe some informal self-employment that's not reported. So we have to think of virtually all levels of self-employment, and are those parts of the formal labor market or parts of the informal labor market? Well, it depends on the individual. The person that grows some vegetables and sells them from a roadside stand every once in a while just to get some extra money, or from a farmer's market, may well be self-employed, or very likely they are part of the informal labor market. They're not reporting these things perhaps. However, many that are self-employed are reporting these values. They have organized entities, corporations, LLCs, partnerships, organized entities where they not only report their labor, but they report their incomes, they report their expenses. So this is largely an issue of reporting or not reporting, which then comes down to how we measure these rates of unemployment and employment. And remember that this is important to us because of our whole labor force participation rate issue, or what part of the adult population, the working age population, ages 16 to 65, is actually employed or unemployed. What part is that labor force? If we think about this, we're going to take and look at the unemployment rate, which will simply be a U, or the unemployment rate, is the number of unemployed divided by that labor force, or divided by the employed and unemployed, and then multiplied by 100, of course, so we get a nice percentage out of this. We might think of this as being 1 minus the employment rate, because the unemployed plus the employed are the labor force. So the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force. This is obviously all in the formal market, because those that are not employed but that consider themselves part of the informal market, we have no way of measuring those. And so this is a measurement issue. And you'll see this when we look in another segment at the real unemployment rate, perhaps, versus the reported unemployment rate. There might be some differences there. So this would be the part of the formal market where there's reporting taking place. Most of this reporting takes place within any given state's Department of Workforce Services, where figures are given each quarter, showing the number of workers, the wages per worker, maybe some unemployment insurance premium being paid through, so that those workers that are unemployed can get some small benefit. This is referred to as an automatic stabilizer. You're being able to receive some benefit that's good for both the unemployed household plus the rest of the economy. So that would be the unemployment rate. And of course, the employment rate is just the opposite. The employment rate, or E, is the number of employed divided by the labor force, multiplied by 100, so that we get, again, some nice even percentage rate. Or we can think of that as 1 minus the unemployment rate. If we consider these two relationships, 1 minus employment and 1 minus unemployment, we have to then remember that the unemployment rate plus the employment rate equal 100%, or 1. So that's what the inference is in this case.